The moment Celia Thornwell realized they'd made a fatal mistake wasn't when they labeled her non-essential. It was when she spotted the flicker of relief on CFO Marvin Beller's pudgy face after she agreed to handle the Q3 reporting package without so much as a sigh. That smug, lipless smirk said everything. It reeked of assumption, of someone believing they'd finally subdued the threat. That she was tamed, harmless, useful, like a stapler. Celia didn't feel rage, no fire, no panic. What she felt was surgical, a coldness that steadied her heart rate, narrowed her vision, and clicked her mind into place like the first piece of a loaded chessboard. Her brain whispered, "So, that's how it's going to be." 2 hours later, from the break room microwave, she watched the executive team toast each other with lukewarm Martinellis. The celebration? Something vaguely titled Cross-Departmental Efficiency Reinforcement, which probably meant 3 people just got laid off to make room for Travis's new dashboard initiative. Celia stirred her sad ramen with the same chopstick she'd used to unjam the label printer 2 weeks prior. Just outside the glass conference room, she stood still. Neutral heels, neutral blouse, invisible to them all. They didn't even blink when she passed. To them, she was part of the scenery. Dependable, predictable, harmless, but furniture remembers every ass that ever sat on it. And Celia? She had receipts. When Celia first joined Ardent Reliant Logistics 7 years ago, they handed her a back-end inventory system held together by Hope, a glue stick, and an Excel 2003 spreadsheet. Within 18 months, she'd quietly rebuilt it from scratch. No announcement, no PowerPoint, no budget increase. Just raw competence. They rewarded her by promoting her sideways. Twice. Her job title ballooned. Her resources shrank. During reviews, they called her a stealth ninja, as though that was supposed to be a compliment and not corporate code for, "We rely on her to clean up everything, but won't pay her like we do." Whenever one of the haircut and sunglasses bros from sales butchered a forecast, they'd smile with that same smarmy desperation and say, "Celia, can you just—" And she would. Not for them, but for the 23 warehouse staffers who relied on her systems running on time to avoid night shifts. For the inventory manager who once cried during a software migration. For the forklift operator who called her Miss C and saved her a parking spot when it snowed. The rot didn't arrive overnight. It started when Travis Alden, the new VP of Operational Evolution, arrived in 900 sneakers and tried to connect with the floor crew by quoting memes. One day, after she corrected his math in a budget sheet, he gave her a tight-lipped grin like she'd just tried to teach him calculus in Klingon. Later, she heard him whisper to Marvin in the hallway, "She's non-essential, but she's good at cleaning up messes." The phrase hit her like a mosquito at 3:00 a.m., small, but instantly enraging. Celia didn't storm into the hallway. She didn't make a scene. She took out the small leather notebook in her purse, next to her backup charger and her laminated contract, and wrote it down. Because Celia Thornwell didn't scream. She documented. She watched as strategic realignment slowly bled into chaos. Legacy clients began dropping. Decision-making moved from strategy to showmanship. Meetings filled with men mistaking loudness for leadership. Celia smiled, nodded, fetched her own coffee, and asked Anya, her college roommate turned employment attorney, to take another look at her contract. The notebook filled fast. Her nickname on the warehouse floor was Fixer, whispered like folklore. But in the C-suite, she was Reliable Celia, the placeholder, the one who made their nonsense look clean. They confused silence with submission, her calm with complacency. But Celia had grown up watching her mother renegotiate rent with landlords twice her size and win. Silence wasn't compliance, it was aim. And Celia's aim? It was damn near perfect. The smell hit before the man even entered the room. Some sharp cocktail of menthol, vintage cologne, and desperation masked as authority. Celia looked up from her laptop just as the elevator doors opened. There he was, Brendan Burke, the private equity consultant with a resume full of buzzwords and no actual companies anyone had heard of. He wore loafers that had never seen a sidewalk, a watch so heavy it probably affected his balance, and a blazer with suede elbow patches like he was about to deliver a TED Talk on agile disruption for the soul. Burke glanced at the Q3 reports, snorted faintly, then turned to the CEO and said it. "You've got too much loyalty on payroll. That's dangerous." Dangerous. Not redundant. Not inefficient. Dangerous. Celia sat 2 seats away, sipping conference room coffee that tasted like regret, while mentally building a new spreadsheet in her mind. Column A. Reasons Brendan Burke will burn this place down. What followed was an hour of verbal dressing, the kind of nonsense only people who've never worked in operations believe. Phrases like trim emotional cost centers and reignite core productivity filled the air like perfume in an elevator. No one used the word layoffs, but the buzzards had officially landed. That evening, Celia skipped her bourbon on ice and instead rang up Anya. "Hypothetically," Celia said, "if I wanted to make sure I got what I was owed in the event they decided I'm emotionally expensive, what would I need in place?" Anya didn't miss a beat. "Net profit clause, not salary-based, not bonus-based. Net profit. Tie it to involuntary termination not based on cause, and bury it deep. Call it something boring." Over boxed Merlot and an encrypted signal thread, they drafted Clause 17F, later relabeled 17G, hidden within the weeds of a contract refresh about strategic continuity and transitional assurances. The wording was surgical, boring, forgettable. 12% of net profit from the fiscal year payable upon involuntary termination, not attributed to misconduct or negligence, and only if no other severance or bonus is provided. It looked like an HR afterthought, dull enough to be ignored, until triggered. Celia signed it. So did internal counsel, Linda, who'd once confused a confidentiality clause with a Wi-Fi password. Linda gave it a quick glance, muttered, "Oh, redundancy boilerplate," and signed with the care of someone mentally picking lunch options. No parade, no cloak and dagger, just precision. Celia filed the countersigned copy in the fireproof safe beside her grandmother's pearl brooch and her emergency burner phone. Not because she thought they'd fire her that month, but because she knew they eventually would. And she was right. Within weeks, her projects were reassigned to juniors who thought logistics latency was a dating term. Budgets got split like wet cardboard. Her name started disappearing from CC threads. When she asked about meetings she wasn't invited to, the answer was always, "Oh, must have been an oversight." "Sure, 3 times in 1 week." She smiled wider, offered to help, volunteered for the grunt work, reformatted spreadsheets no one read, played the part of the grateful veteran too stubborn to leave. They didn't know Clause 17G had shifted from footnote to fuse. They gave the whole nightmare a name, Project Emberstream, because of course they did. It sounded like a deodorant. Burke stood up in an all-hands meeting, flanked by Travis and the CEO, and declared, "We're igniting core value by trimming operational inefficiencies." Celia underlined those exact words in her notebook, followed by, "Igniting core value equals gutting departments plus gaslighting survivors." The very next day, her entire logistics analytics team, 6 brilliant people who understood the difference between volume variance and gross margin impact, was atomized. 2 were reallocated to marketing. 1 was lent to HR for talent modeling. 2 got termination notices and a $25 gift card for a sandwich place no longer in business. And Celia? She was promoted. They called it a lateral promotion, of course. New title: Senior Strategic Integration Partner, Logistics Solutions Division, which meant exactly nothing. Worse, it reported directly to Jeremy Lott, a man who once confused inventory reconciliation with email archiving. Jeremy was 3 things: loud, clueless, and somehow always overdressed in exactly the wrong way. He once opened a meeting by calling Celia ma'am and then asked if she could dumb down the back-end math for the creatives. His last big initiative was a TikTok campaign to humanize warehouse automation. It cost $40,000 and died in under a day. Still, Celia shook his hand when they reintroduced her to her new role. Then she went home, made a new encrypted folder on her drive, and titled it Evidence, Reassignment, Lot. Jeremy held daily stand-ups where everyone sat and brainstorming sessions that mostly involved him quoting business memes and giggling at his own insights. In her first week, Celia spoke 4 times. Jeremy interrupted her all 4, each time with, "Love where your head's at. Let's circle back to that." They never did, so she stopped talking. But she didn't stop listening or logging. Every assignment diverted from her. Every budget adjustment she was cut out of. Every email she was mysteriously left off. All of it documented. And then, on a dull Thursday, Jeremy presented a full Q4 logistics heat map during a virtual strategy call. It was her heat map. Her watermark was gone. His name, written in Comic Sans, sat at the bottom. "Built this over the weekend," Jeremy said with the swagger of a man who thought VLOOKUP was cutting edge. Celia smiled. "Impressive," she replied. "Reminds me of something I saw last quarter." No one noticed the twitch in her jaw except Nina from finance, who mouthed, "Holy shit," across the screen. After the call, Jeremy clapped her on the back like they were frat bros at a reunion. "Knew we'd make a great team. Now let's trim some fat from those old budgets, eh?" She logged that as, "Jeremy, misattribution, heat map, theft." Celia didn't drink that night. She ran, through her old neighborhood, through memories of hallway favors and backhanded compliments. Every time someone had said, "Can you just..." Every time she'd been called a team player. They weren't just sidelining her. They were erasing her. Slowly, deliberately. And they thought she hadn't noticed. That she was too polite, too corporate-worn, too female. But Celia Thornwell didn't need a stage. She needed documentation. And documentation she had, in triplicate. Then came the announcement. CEO Blake Marston stood under the soft LEDs of the main conference room, sleeves rolled up to signal urgency, voice lowered to indicate regret. He looked like he practiced his empathy face in the mirror that morning. "Due to macroeconomic pressures and evolving stakeholder expectations," he said, "we've made the difficult but necessary decision to pause year-end bonuses for all non-essential staff." The word pause lingered like a threat. "Temporarily," he added, "we're still a family, and families pull together in times of difficulty." Celia didn't flinch. Around her, eyes widened, throats clenched. Someone whispered an expletive. She just sipped her cold coffee and stared at the man who once called her the engine under the hood. Apparently, he'd decided she was now a spare tire. 2 days later, they called her in. HR rep was new, nervous. Reading from a script printed on thick paper stock like that made it more official. "Due to restructuring, your role has been deemed redundant, effective immediately." No mention of her rebuilds, no mention of her 7 years. Just an envelope and a softly spoken, "We hope you'll stay connected with the ardent community." Celia didn't sit. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, said, "Thank you," and walked out. No tears, no goodbyes. Just her phone, her keys, and a printed copy of the termination letter tucked neatly into her leather folio. At home, she placed it beside the countersigned contract copy, the one with Clause 17G highlighted in blue, the one no one had remembered existed. Yet, the following Monday, at exactly 8:13 a.m., An email went out. Subject line, Clause 17G, Payment Enforcement. 1 PDF attached. Body text. Per Clause 17G of Ms. Celia Thornwell's employment agreement, please initiate payment within the stipulated 90-day window to avoid breach. Celia didn't send it herself. That honor went to Anya, the same friend who drafted the clause in the first place. Anya, who wore red lipstick to arbitration and had the voice of a courtroom bullet. At that moment, Celia was stirring sugar into her coffee on her balcony, robe on, cat purring at her feet. No gloating, no rage, just quiet, earned satisfaction. By 8:29 a.m., the email landed in legal's inbox. Specifically, Linda's. Linda, who still tracked deadlines with sticky notes and once asked if arbitration meant optional. Linda, who had glanced at Clause 17G once before and dismissed it as transition fluff. Now, she opened the PDF. She read it once, then again, then a third time, slower, jaw tightening with every line. 12% of net profits, if terminated without cause, in absence of bonus or severance, payable within 90 days. Signed, countersigned, dated, binding. She didn't breathe until she hit forward to CFO Marvin Beller. 3 words in the body. Please review urgently. Marvin opened the file during the 9 a.m. metric sync. A man who'd survived 3 market crashes and one extremely public divorce, Marvin was not easily rattled. But as his eyes crawled over Clause 17G, the color drained from his face like someone had pulled the battery from his heart. Clause 17G, he whispered, like it was a ghost. Travis Alden, seated nearby, raised an eyebrow. Thornwell? Didn't we just drop her? Marvin didn't answer. He just stared at the contract. Then his pen, his beloved Mont Blanc, slipped from his hand and hit the table with a plastic thud. Tell me we gave her something, he muttered. Anything. A token severance. A bonus. A handshake. Over speaker, Linda's voice was flat. No package was issued. Standard termination. No payout necessary. That was the understanding. Marvin closed his eyes. Oh my God. The room fell into silence. Someone tried to make a joke about how at least she didn't burn the place down. It didn't land, because what Celia had done was worse. She hadn't gone scorched earth. She hadn't leaked anything. She hadn't raised her voice. She'd followed protocol, used their language, played by their rules. And now, by their own signatures, they owed her exactly 12% of the company's net profits. $1.74 million. 12% of the $14.5 million net Ardent Reliant Logistics had cleared that year, including multiple government contracts. Contracts Celia had personally secured, negotiated, and, yes, executed. Travis had even posted about it on LinkedIn, cropping her out of the photo but leaving her signature on the agreement, buried in the metadata. There was no wiggle room, no NDA, no precedent to suppress it. Now the CFO's hands trembled. They could try to fight it, delay it, spin it. But they'd lose, because the clause wasn't a trick, it was a contract, and contracts were their religion. By 10:03 a.m., a follow-up email went out. Subject, Clause 17G, clarification needed. It came from Linda again, though this one practically bent over backwards trying to sound friendly. Hi, Ms. Thornwell. Upon further internal review, there may have been a clerical oversight in your termination paperwork. We'd like to open a conversation about a potential settlement that reflects your invaluable contributions to the firm. Attached offer, $120,000. Celia laughed, not bitterly, just that dry, full-body kind of laugh that made her cat leap off the sofa in protest. She forwarded the message to Anya with one line. "They think I'll sell for 6.9% of what they owe. Should we send crayons?" Anya didn't respond in words. She responded by CCing the CFO, legal, and the entire executive inbox group. Per our prior communication, Clause 17G clearly outlines a payment structure based on net profits from all revenue channels, including but not limited to government transportation contracts executed under Ms. Thornwell's leadership. We respectfully decline the offer. That email landed like a silent grenade, because what Marvin and Travis had forgotten, or more likely never known, was that the biggest logistics contract of the year, the one that single-handedly boosted their Q2 forecasts, was Celia's. She had written the initial proposal, led negotiations, flown to D.C. on her own PTO, and secured the $11.2 million deal with the Department of Federal Transportation. There were emails, receipts, internal docs, and a LinkedIn post from Travis where he stood next to a blurry silhouette, Celia cropped out, and captioned it, "Teamwork makes the dream work." Now that same teamwork meant her payout had nearly doubled. By that afternoon, the revised payout calculation hit Marvin's desk. $1,746,210.34. Not projected, not negotiable, binding, and public, if they pushed her. The CFO looked like he'd swallowed a handful of thumbtacks. "If we pay her," he muttered, staring at the balance sheet, "we tank our Q4 investor call." The CEO, Blake, rubbed his temples. "And if we don't?" "Breach of contract, legal exposure, arbitration fees, press coverage, audit flags. She'll bury us." Pam from legal, brought in mid-meeting to confirm, spoke gently. "There's no clause allowing clawback or reinterpretation. We overlooked it. It's active. It's enforceable." Travis, now visibly sweating through his linen blend shirt, mumbled, "She always was obsessed with the fine print." Outside that boardroom, Celia sat on her porch, legs up, sipping tea with both hands wrapped around the mug like it was a medal. Not because she needed comfort, because she deserved to hold something solid while the structure she once kept standing caved in on itself. Ardent had mistaken her composure for consent, her silence for surrender. They forgot she was the one person in the building who always read the footnotes, and now those footnotes were eating them alive. They couldn't offer severance without acknowledging the breach, couldn't negotiate without validating the clause, couldn't delay without risking headlines. Every option bled. Celia didn't call, didn't threaten, didn't grandstand. She waited, because the trap wasn't emotional, it was mathematical. The following Thursday, Anya filed the arbitration paperwork. Clean, quiet, brutal. Filed under the CBA's Executive Employment Breach category. Attached, 47 pages of exhibits, timestamps, emails, charts, and a redacted transcript of Travis's infamous non-essential hallway comment, recorded courtesy of a janitorial cam Celia had known existed for years. By Friday, the phrase "contingency related to former staff claim" appeared as a footnote in the company's quarterly investor update. One small line, massive impact. It dropped at 6:00 p.m., a classic PR move meant to fly under radar. But radar doesn't sleep. At 6:17 p.m., one of Ardent's largest institutional investors flagged it in a group thread. "Is this related to Thornwell?" No one replied. By Saturday morning, internal Slack channels lit up. Terms like reputational fallout, contractual time bomb, and Q1 damage mitigation bounced around with rising panic. The company tried to plug the leak. It was too late. Once a whisper hits the investor forums, you can't unring that bell. Then came Monday. Harold Kravitz, VP of Investor Relations, golf buddy of the CEO, retired linen shirt wearer and champion of narrative alignment, resigned to pursue new ventures. His LinkedIn went dark by noon. The move sent a ripple through the executive suite. Suddenly, mid-level compliance managers were asking pointed questions, like whether other contracts might contain similar clauses. They were told to focus on controllables. 2 quit within the week. By Tuesday, 4 major shareholders had filed inquiries. Legal fees climbed, insurance partners requested arbitration records, and somewhere, in a quiet regional office, a junior analyst leaned over her desk and whispered, "Who the hell is Celia Thornwell?" Like her name summoned ghosts. Meanwhile, Celia was at a cafe she liked, splitting a croissant and crossword puzzle with her mother. She watched the headlines scroll silently on her phone. One caught her eye. Firm delays earnings call amid legal uncertainty. She took a bite of pastry. "Flaky," she muttered. Her mother asked. Celia smiled. "Just something I worked really hard on." In the boardroom, CEO Blake Marston was pacing like a caged animal. His Fitbit kept buzzing from elevated heart rate alerts, but he ignored them. "We need to contain this," he hissed, eyes darting toward the door as if Celia might materialize from the drywall. Marvin, slumped in a chair with his tie loosened and a headache blooming in his temples, spoke barely above a whisper. "She's not even talking publicly, and she's destroying us." "Maybe that's worse," someone mumbled from the corner. "You can't spin silence." The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. For years, they had overlooked her. Now, her silence was the loudest thing in the room. An email arrived just then, the subject line soaked in corporate desperation. "Exciting opportunity to reconnect." Celia read it while sipping iced tea on her porch, sunlight sliding across her hardwood table. The message wasn't from legal, not HR. It was from Blake himself, the same man who once called her our behind-the-scenes miracle in public town halls and an overhead line item in private budget meetings now wanted to explore mutually beneficial reintegration. They offered her a title that sounded like it had been pulled from a jargon generator: Global Ops Transformation Advisor. Bonuses reinstated. Salary doubled. Equity package. Even hinted at a press release should she return quietly. It wasn't a comeback. It was a bribe. Celia gave it 4 minutes of thought. 2 were spent stirring her tea. The other 2 were spent rereading the arbitration filing on her laptop, highlighting the line she liked most. "This action seeks accountability, not reemployment." She didn't reply. Instead, she forwarded the entire chain to 2 business journalists, one at the Ledger, the other at VentureWeek, both of whom had covered Ardent's earnings calls before. Subject line: Ongoing arbitration related to executive misclassification and contractual abuse. Body: Happy to provide documentation upon request. This matter is active and enforceable. Attachments: Arbitration filing, Clause 17G, termination letter, and the rehire email. She clicked send and took another bite of biscotti she didn't even like. Within 12 hours, the first article dropped. Strategic lead files 1.7M, arbitration, over-ignored contract clause, investors rattled. It wasn't just news. It was a cultural moment. Reddit lit up. LinkedIn posts dissected every paragraph. Twitter/X trended with hashtag clause 17G. Screenshots of the clause circulated like gospel. "She built a guillotine with dotted lines," someone tweeted. "Celia Thornwell is my new religion," another posted. Someone made t-shirts. The company issued a bland statement. "We are engaged in ongoing internal negotiations and remain committed to transparency." It backfired, badly, because in the court of public opinion, deflection smells like guilt, and jargon smells like blood. Meanwhile, Celia spent her Tuesday afternoon strolling through a botanical garden with her mother. Her phone buzzed with journalist requests, legal speculation, and memes she didn't even fully understand. She ignored them. She took a photo of a blooming orchid instead, because this was never about attention. It was about being undeniable. They'd tried to bury her in silence, but she'd turned that silence into a weapon. Back at HQ, the mood darkened. Legal met in emergency session. The AC was cranked to Arctic, but no one could stop sweating. Linda stood at the head of the table, face pale, voice level. She held the contract like scripture. Clause 17G, she said, reading aloud. 12% of net profits for the fiscal year, payable if termination occurs without cause and if no severance or bonus is offered. Legally binding. Signed, countersigned. No one interrupted. No one blinked. Just silence. The kind that follows disaster or precedes vomiting. Marvin's hand twitched. His coffee mug slipped off the table and shattered across the floor. No one moved to pick it up, because this wasn't a lawsuit anymore. It was an execution, clean, bloodless, and irreversible. The CEO finally broke the silence. So, we pay it? His voice cracked at the end, brittle, almost childlike. Linda nodded once, slow and deliberate. Or you risk breach of contract. Arbitration will convert to binding judgment in less than 30 days, and thanks to the press leak, settlement confidentiality is no longer possible. If we fight, we lose more. Fast. Nobody asked how it happened. They all knew. They let it happen. They saw the neat blouses and polite nods and assumed they were dealing with a secretary who happened to be good at spreadsheets, not the architect of their most profitable quarter and the owner of the trap they had just triggered with their own signatures. They had fired Celia Thornwell without cause. They hadn't offered severance. They hadn't read their own paperwork. And now they were going to transfer exactly $1,746,210.34 into her account and then spend the next quarter explaining why their profit margins nosedived for no apparent reason. 6,000 miles away, Celia sat on a beach chair, toes buried in warm sand, oversized sunglasses resting just low enough to glance at the stock ticker scrolling across her burner iPad. Ardent's share value had dipped 2 points overnight. Shareholder confidence hemorrhaging, just enough red on the chart to make her smile. Next to her sat a coconut drink with far too many umbrellas and a paperback novel her mother had handed her without a word. She didn't need to read it. Just holding it was enough. The ocean hummed in front of her. No emails, no Slack pings, no execs explaining her own work back to her in louder voices. Just silence and a 7-figure bank notification. The company would spin it, of course. They'd call it a clerical misstep, a misunderstanding. They'd pay and hope no one else noticed. But Celia knew better. She knew that in every boardroom someone was now asking, "Are there other clauses like that buried in our stack?" She knew Marvin would stay up nights reviewing every contract signed in the last 5 years. That Linda would start color-coding files like a woman trying to rewind time. That Travis would quietly step down to pursue opportunities in fintech. But Celia wouldn't see it. She wouldn't need to. Because this wasn't revenge. This wasn't a hit job. This was restitution. And she didn't torch the building. She invoiced it. Her mother glanced over, squinting in the sun. "Work email again?" Celia shook her head, smiling faintly. "Not work, just closure." She leaned back in her chair, the waves breaking softly in the distance, as the company that had called her invisible tried to disappear her payout with a discount. Too late, too loud, too obvious. And Celia Thornwell, the quietest person in the building, had just become its most expensive.